Well, welcome. Today we have a special guest all the way from D.C. or from 30,000 feet up, wherever you've been lately. If somebody doesn't know you, and I doubt it, but let's start with an introduction.
Al, always a pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm Joe Kennedy. I am your congressman. I represent the 4th Congressional District in Massachusetts. Live in Newton, right across from Boston College with my wife, 2 kids, and a little dog. So life is busy. Life is good.
Now, you seem to be one of the few that'll cross over the aisle and actually talk to either the blue or the red, depending who it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been seeing that you're getting together with Republicans and not worrying about color as much as like helping people on domestic violence issues.
I appreciate that. So look, Al, I think it is a, we are in at the moment a hyper-polarized political environment, which has been interesting for me to see because I come home and it is impossible to ignore the ways in which I think a Trump administration ends up focusing on an awful lot of things that Massachusetts does right and does well, and either not supporting those efforts or fundamentally targeting them. But I spent half my time in Washington, D.C. working with colleagues from every other corner of the country, a number of whom are in districts that still, where the president enjoys an awful lot of support. And that might be hard for some people to understand how he does enjoy that level of support, but he does. And so my job, I think, has been to try to move an agenda forward where I can, and to stand up to some of these policies where I think it's necessary. So it's been leading those efforts on standing up and fighting for our values on issues like healthcare and immigration, climate change, where I think the president hasn't done the right thing. But it's also then working with our colleagues where I think we can really get together and get some stuff done. So worked with Senator Dan Sullivan, a Republican from Alaska, over the course of the past couple of years on a bill called the Power Act that is trying to increase awareness and resources for victims of domestic violence. We had to redraft the bill a couple of times, but we're able to get it out of the Senate and then out of a very conservative Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives, and then onto the House floor where it passed unanimously. And the bill has every federal, the chief judge in every federal district around the country hold at least one forum over the course of a year to try to make sure that domestic violence victims, organizations, community members have an idea as to what resources are available for them. I was a domestic violence prosecutor before when I was in the DA system here in the court system, and it's a devastating crime. It is far more prevalent than I think most people understand and recognize. It's one of the hardest crimes to prosecute, and it is, as you probably know, the most predictable form of homicide that we have in our society. And we could be doing more about it. And I applaud Senator Sullivan, who himself was a former Attorney General in Alaska, for being willing to throw those same party labels out the door and work with me on it. And so we've been able to actually, over the course of the past couple of weeks, get a series of bills and amendments passed with broad bipartisan support. And I'm proud of that.
Well, you mentioned what we do in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm probably the most proud of is, you wouldn't have a hard time, but I have a hard time distinguishing between a liberal Massachusetts Republican and a conservative Massachusetts Democrat. Mm-hmm. And I'm really proud that I see that middle, mm-hmm. that our legislators work together. I wish you could take more of that.
And now I think that one of the challenges we see is you do have unquestionably here, when it comes to local politics, in our state legislature at Beacon Hill, overwhelmingly Democrat with a Republican governor, but a willingness to work together to find ways to deliver for our residents. Not to say everybody's always thrilled with the way things work out, but on the whole, I think you've got a dynamic that has evolved where people are actively trying to bridge those divides on most of those issues. That is not the way politics are working at the moment at the federal level, where I think all of us could probably be doing a better job. I do think that a big portion of this lands on the shoulders of the President of the United States, just because whoever he or she may be, they're going to be the ones that end up setting the context of a debate, and they've got the loudest microphone every day. And so they're going to be the ones that have the biggest influence over the trajectory of these policies. And I do think President Trump has not made it a priority to actually find ways to bring people together behind a vision. He has trying to find ways to motivate a political base for his own electoral prospects at the expense of actually finding ways to form coalitions that are actually necessary in order to deliver legislative success. And so it's one of the great frustrations and disappointments I have with his tenure so far, is that rather than actually trying to say, hey, you want 3 and I want 5, let's see if there's a way to get to 4. Or even if you're in the majority and you want 5 and I want 3, we might be settling on 4 1/4, right? That you try to find ways to address those challenges and you move on to the next one, because there's enough problems out there that our country needs to solve. We're not quite in that dynamic yet. And that leads to not only this polarization, it leads to people getting angry at the fact that their government isn't solving these problems. And then it can be, I think, unfortunately targeted towards, for cheap political gain, to the vilification of your opponent, rather than focusing on the fact that, you know what, that conservative Republican's view from Alabama, his voice is just as American as mine. And I might disagree with him, but I respect the fact that that voice values, and I want it to count, and it's worth trying to understand why he or she might feel a certain way. And if there's a way we can bridge that divide, great, and if not, fine, but let's go find a way to work on something else.
Well, the era of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan.
Yep.
You know, I can disagree with your politics, but I can respect you as a person,
Mm-hmm.
and we can figure a way of working together. I mean, I only wish those days would come back.
And they can. They can. It was a human system then, it's a human system now, and there are people in it. The challenge is that for whatever reason, one, again, I don't think the president has helped cultivate that environment. But 2, you've got an overall political environment where we're not incentivized to compromise, where you don't actually have people that are for the most part trying to find ways through these big issues. You know, and that's coming from somebody that not only this domestic violence bill, but worked with another colleague of mine, Republican Garrett Graves from Louisiana, on a bill to try to increase our ability to do constituent casework. Now, this is something that, given your background, you might find interesting. It came to my attention, Garrett brought the bill to my attention months ago, and he was working on a system to try to make sure that congressional offices could use technology, apps, tablets, to help facilitate constituent casework, right? So if you come to me with a problem, in most cases you have to then sign a waiver so that my office can talk to whichever federal agency you need help with, whether it's, say, FEMA after a natural disaster, so that I can then contact FEMA and help work on your behalf. The issue with that is, if it's FEMA, imagine if the power's out in your house, you can't get access to a printer, you can't necessarily go down the street because your car is damaged to get a printer ink anymore. The mail might not necessarily be working, or could take a little while for my office to send something out to you. If your computer's dead, you don't necessarily have power. How do I then get that authorization back? What if I could just show up on your doorstep with a tablet and have you sign something with your finger on a piece of paper, right, or on an app? It turns out that you should be able to do that. Obviously, the technology exists, but trying to actually do that through every different agency that has their own sets of rules for how to deal with that technology is massively complicated. Garrett's team and my team worked on that for months to be able to just make that process work. That bill passed unanimously, right? There's not a partisan issue on trying to make congressional offices work more effectively or efficiently, or to try to make sure that we can advocate more effectively for our constituents. Kudos to him for thinking of the idea. We helped refine it, and that bill, again, had broad bipartisan.
You didn't worry about, am I helping Democrat spouses who are abused?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, okay, I don't care if it's red or blue that started it. No. If I'm dealing with Americans, it's the right thing.
It's the right thing. And there are, Mr. Graves and I will have our disagreements on healthcare. That's fine. We can have our disagreements on healthcare, but we can still say there's a whole wide variety of other policies that we can actually work on. When we have to fight about healthcare, we can fight about healthcare, but let's not preclude that from finding the other 10, 15, 20 things that we can't work together on.
But I remember one of the first shows you came on, way back when, prior to children.
And as much caffeine.
You're no longer just Congressman Kennedy, now you're the dad of, and I won't say the names, but you lose your identity real fast. But
my job used to be the hardest part of my day. Now it is.
But you mentioned that a lot of the issues that people from the square states have, Really, big farmers don't impact Brookline. But you said that sometimes I have to compromise on what the Square State people need because I need technology help.
And look, it is a big and diverse country, and that's, in my mind, a good thing. I was having this conversation with a colleague of mine on the House floor now a couple of months ago. He's a farmer, and he was eager to get back home. We were in his long series of votes before we were going back to our districts, and he was telling me how accurate his vet has been at predicting the dates of birth for the calves that his cows have, and comparing how his vet does that manually versus the technological ultrasounds and how quickly they've advanced. He then went into a very graphic description as to what checking that manually was, which from somebody that can't keep a cactus alive was an eye-opening thing. I don't know the first thing about doing that, but he does. And in his district, that's a really important thing to be able to know about not just agriculture, but livestock and the raising of cattle and the challenges that our agricultural industry and beef industry confront. That's not a number one issue in Milford, Massachusetts. It's not a number one issue in the 4th District of Massachusetts. And all the town halls we have, and all of the office hours I've done, and all of the constituents.
Doesn't come up a lot.
It doesn't come up a lot. That's fine. What I do is then try to listen to those circumstances where he's got a perspective and point of view. I might learn something from him. I might agree. I might disagree. But then I would hope that on the issues that do confront our district, that he isn't necessarily as familiar with, because why would he be? That he would be willing to hear me out. And I think one of the challenges we have in this circumstance is that one congressman, he probably is willing to hear me out. There's others that aren't, and that's the hard part.
But you know, Joe, the far right, the far left, sorry, both sides scare me. I can't tell you that an uber liberal makes me feel any more comfortable than an uber conservative. So if you can deal with the middle, I think you're doing better than most.
Look, I think one of my colleagues, again, this guy by the name of Trey Gowdy, who is a very strong conservative. He led the Benghazi Commission. He was asked, he's retiring from Congress, and was asked in an interview what serving in Congress is like these days. And he actually said that he didn't look all that fondly back on his last 10 years. And he said it's gotten to the point where if your opponent wins, if the opposite party wins an election, that the country's going in a horrible place, right? And he used a different turn of phrase. And just brought up the question as to, why is that the case? Now, that I have Mr. Gowdy's a friend of mine. A lot of folks will kind of wonder how somebody that could be as partisan as he was and leading this Benghazi Commission that ultimately found that Secretary Clinton did no wrong, that ended up, how could somebody that participated in that then, and for I think the perspective of many progressives, helped galvanize this partisan tilt to it, then turn back and say, hey, it shouldn't be so bad. But I also give him credit for being willing to say, hey, this shouldn't be so bad. And perhaps for the Republican leadership that has been pushing this this kind of communication strategy and this theory that if Democrats win, our country's going to be in the gutter, maybe not. Maybe not.
Oh, but now let's take a couple charged issues.
Yeah.
I keep hearing group people scream about DACA. That under the Democrats, nothing was done. Now under Republicans, nothing was done. We should send them home. And I laughed because the other night I said, yeah, send them right back to Milford, Nebraska. I mean, I look at my mother. Now, luckily my grandfather came over with the proper paperwork. But my mother, if you ask me, I'm Portuguese. I wouldn't know how to live in Portugal. My mother, who's 95, has been here since she was 16. Telling her that her home is anywhere but Milford is silly. So when I think of some of these kids, on the abstract, you can look on paper and say statistically, send them home. Then I say, where's home?
Yeah.
Milford? Cumberland? What the heck is going on?
Look, I think we have to be pretty clear about the history and the evolution of this problem. So without question, Immigration is one of the most challenging issues across our society. It has been, and to some extent, I think will be for a while into our future. But also remember that when my first year in Congress, 2013, President Obama made this a priority. A bipartisan group of senators, led by Senator John McCain, Marco Rubio, Jeff Flake, along with a series of Democrats, part of this gang of 8, pulled together and came up with a compromise bill on immigration that secured our border, that tried to make far more sense out of our legal immigration system, that worked on a pathway for individuals that were here without proper documentation to earn their way over more than a decade to actually sort that out. And it passed the Senate with a veto-proof majority, nearly 70 votes. We couldn't even get a vote on it in the House of Representatives. So when folks then as a response to that, because John Boehner wouldn't even give us a chance to vote on it on the House floor, as a response to that, when we were blocked and we had the votes to pass the bill, which is tragic because we could have solved this problem, when we didn't, President Obama then said, okay, if we can't address our immigration challenges writ large, let's find ways to work on some of the most critically important parts to this. One of them has to be, I think under anybody's just moral definition, DACA recipients, these kids that were brought here as young kids and that essentially know no other country.
This is their home.
This is their home. And so he basically said, under our discretion, we're not going to deport them. That was the best way that he could deal with it, given the fact that Congress wouldn't. We now hear, well, Democrats didn't act on this. That's not entirely true. Obama and a Democratic-led Senate tried. John Boehner blocked us from doing it. We now have a chance to solve part of that problem. Paul Ryan's carrying on that tradition and not giving us a chance to vote on the bill. And so in the meantime of this, the decision to end DACA and throw all of this up to the uncertain winds was done solely by President Trump. And so I don't want to come on and squarely kind of point the finger in the opposite direction here. I think one of the challenges, though, is looking at that history and saying, when it comes to this issue, the president has the ability to actually make this to take the temperature down, one, to provide some clarity and certainty to kids that don't know any other home other than this country, and then 3, to help work with us to try to address that problem and solve it in a way that the vast majority of Americans actually would support, and they do. And we have the votes for that today. Speaker Ryan won't give us a chance to vote on it.
See, I'm split, because if you come to this country, illegal, legal, whatever, you put your head down, because we know a lot of people in Milford that they came here because, and again, my grandfather came here legally, but can you imagine being, well, you're away in Washington, but being away from your kids except for a week, a year, because you came to America, you live like a pauper, so every penny you make you can send back so your daughters have a better life. I admire him, I'm just amazed.
Yeah.
But he was an immigrant. He put his head down, came over here with $32.80 in his pocket.
Did he really?
And somebody helped him from Milford.
Yeah.
Now, I have no problem helping people like my grandfather, or especially if they, the kids. If you break my law though, sell drugs, battery, any kind of violent crime, then I sit there and say, throw them out.
Yeah.
Don't care. It's terrible to be that cold, but
no, I don't think I think most Americans agree with you, right?
But these kids at 2 years old, it's like looking at my mother now saying, well, you could go back to Portugal and live. She's been here for 78 years in Milford. How could she live anywhere else? So I just don't get it, because when I look at it, it's so easy statistically to, indicate that these people should be thrown out. But realistically, I wonder how many people, and I'll segue into my next question, healthcare. Keep hearing we shouldn't give immigrants healthcare.
We don't.
And, but the head of our ED here, Jeff Hopkins said, I don't look at your visa, I don't look at your passport. I took this little pesky Hippocratic oath that says do no harm. So if somebody comes into my ER and needs medical attention, I treat them. And I did, when we did the conservative view, I brought up, I said, okay, you're on the border. Some little boy comes up to you and says, Mr. Kennedy, I'm sick, would you help me?
Yes.
Are you going to turn your back, kick them down the road?
No. And so look, the issue on this, and when I said we don't give folks that are here without proper documentation health care, I mean health insurance, right? This is where the whole argument for me falls apart, Al, because if you do believe that we are and should be a society where if I walk out across the parking lot and I get hit by a bus, somebody's going to scoop me up into an ambulance and rush me into the medical center, that you're going to do that before somebody looks for an insurance card, which I think almost everybody says you should do. Just treat somebody, make sure they save your life, we'll deal with the other stuff later. Good, fine, I agree. But if you're going to do that, you then have two options, right? You're going to say, okay, somebody's gone into an emergency room, it's going to cost them $25,000. We can either say, okay, that then is then going to be on the back of that family to try to come up with that $25,000. They don't have insurance, they have to pay for it. And in all likelihood, they can't, and so they won't, in which case those costs get socialized around all of us already.
Anyway.
So we pay for it anyway. The question around, and this was the whole kind of mind-blowing debate for me around the Affordable Care Act and these efforts to repeal it, was that the impetus behind a big portion of that, what was called an individual mandate, was actually personal responsibility. Trying to say that if you are going to benefit from a system, then you cannot free ride into that same system. What Republicans have done by repealing that individual mandate, but not addressing the issues on pre-existing conditions, right? Which on the one hand, it's the most popular part of that law and it's the most humane part of that law. It says insurance companies can't deny you because you were sick before, right? Which I wholeheartedly agree. But if you can't be denied because you were sick before, and you can still go now without insurance coverage, why wouldn't you just wait till you have cancer and then walk in and say, treat me? And that's what people are going to go do.
That's what bothers me. Okay, somebody's got the sniffles, something happens. For $5, I give them something, they're sick, I give them antibiotics, they're fixed. If it's whether I feed my child tonight or I take these, I go spend the money on antibiotics, I'm probably going to wait. And God bless that your family's done pretty well. My family's done okay. We got health care. If my daughters got sick, I never worried about, well, if I take her to the doctor, can I eat tonight? That just seems basic to me. I don't understand. We're going to give people medical care anyway.
Our society, our healthcare system is essentially built to answer one question. What should we do to care for a neighbor at the moment of their greatest need, right? And it's the answer to that question. And so if you think you should say, look, we'll care for them, and then worry about these questions about insurance and who pays and how much and the rest of it later, fine. That's essentially the system that I think most Americans actually have said that's what we want to do. The key question that has not been asked in this debate, but that needs to get asked, is not do we pay, but who pays? And the who pays part is a critical piece to this. And again, the Affordable Care Act, while not perfect, tried to implement some level of personal responsibility to make sure that all of us, because we were all going to benefit from this system, whether it was bringing a new child into this world or watching a loved one pass through it or some tragedy along the way, because we were all going to benefit from it, you all had to give into it too.
But Joe, when you say who pays, we pay.
Yep.
One way or another.
Yep.
We pay.
Yep.
Ever since I've been involved with the hospital here, the medical center, I've been very proud that we take care of everybody in Milford. Period.
So we can have a decision. The question is, you're 100% right, we all do. So the question then becomes, do you want to pay less or do you want to pay more? And what share of that should be you and me subsidizing somebody else versus to the extent that they can, they should pay for part of that themselves. To the extent that
what they can.
Right. And so there's ways there to craft policy to make sure that to the extent that people can, they should pay for that themselves. And we should want to pay less rather than more. The most expensive way to treat people is make sure that they come to an emergency room.
Right, chronic, let it blow. But see, that
and
whole
that's the
debate
system that
on
we've created.
Repeal and replace, pardon me, but as an old man, I kind of found it backwards. Because to me, I've always believed you can complain about anything you're willing to fix. If you got a better answer, offer me the replacement. Let me debate the replacement. Then if we all agree it's a better system, or at least 51% of us do, then you can repeal.
So luckily, a very thin margin of the U.S. Senate agreed with you. There was no viable replacement alternative. And I think ultimately that's why, because even though the proposals there were proposals, They were not viable, and they were not reflective of the values that most Americans had. I sat through a 36 hours straight of a meeting, markup hearing on this, on the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And the draft that had come out of our Republican House colleagues, it was clear that most of them hadn't had a chance to read it, because we were in no debates with some of them, that when you actually took their rhetoric and then took it to the text, it didn't pass muster.
You don't let facts get in the way of my informed opinion?
We're in the midst of a massive opioid epidemic, and that bill took away access to mental behavioral health care for hundreds of thousands, not millions of people across the country. And it did so in a technical and somewhat confusing way, but it was going to strip access to mental behavioral health care, addiction services for any Medicaid, a guarantee of service for any Medicaid beneficiary across the country. Medicaid's the largest payer of mental behavioral health in this country. And so when you start hearing folks say, hey, we're going to have a much better system out there, and you say, okay, well, how? When you see our Republican colleagues continue to target Medicaid to the tune of $800 billion, I've asked every government witness that has come before our committee and the health committee that said, do you think you can do more with $800 billion or less? If you are good at running your agency, if I give you $800 billion, do you think you can treat more people or less? And if the answer is, yeah, you can do the same, then you're not running your agency very well.
Yeah, I was going to say, you got a fundamental management problem.
You got a fundamental management problem. And if the answer is, it has to be, of course you can treat more people, and of course you can increase health outcomes with $800 billion more. Well, the question then is not should you or shouldn't you, it's how much of that should we spend vis-a-vis the other demands in our country. And the issue, again, with healthcare is this is a system that all of us are going to need at some point. And so we're not really debating whether that system, in my mind, should exist. It's who pays how much and when. And unfortunately, we're not at a point yet where we can, despite my efforts that we talked about earlier, finding Republican colleagues that are willing to address some of these other issues, where when it comes to healthcare, it's still
And it amazes me because we've had this debate when we had people involved directly with frontline opioid addiction. I grew up, I thought of the heroin user. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a skizzy, scuzzy guy in dark alley in the back of Boston somewhere. Not the quarterback or the girl soccer player next door.
Yep.
So it amazes me that people can't get over. It's not them is us.
About 20% of our country suffers from mental behavioral illness, right? 1 in 5. 1 in 5, right? So this is not, and everybody, literally everybody, will suffer from a health issue at some point.
Somewhere.
Right? At some point, right? Whether it's you or a loved one, we all got something. Or you all, if you don't yet, you will have one. It is a one guarantee in life. You will get one. And so, again, I think that system should be set up to say, okay, well, what kind of system do you want to be there for somebody in their moment of greatest need? And there's challenges and complexities and all the rest of it. But if you answer that question by saying, yeah, you should be able to, every American should be able to have access to the healthcare that they need, when they need it, at a price that they can afford. And if that's reasonable, then let's try to solve those 3 goals.
Years ago, we heard the term, it's the economy, stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Today, it seems like the economy is not doing too bad.
Mm-hmm. So the overall economy, the numbers are pretty darn good, right? No doubt about
4%.
that. Unemployment rate, second quarter growth, 4.1%. Unemployment rate has dropped down.
Lower than I've ever seen.
Yeah. However, Alan, I think this is the real crux of this issue, is the economy is going great for some, and it's not going great for a lot of others. And so that inequity is something that I think policymakers, myself in Congress and others, have to try to wrestle with. So one concrete example here. We've got a plant in Fall River, Massachusetts, part of the community that I represent, that has been home to Phillips Lighting since the 1970s. Phillips Lighting, they employ about 160 people at that facility. They're a multinational corporation. They made over $340 million last year. They took about $190 million as part of a stock buyback earlier this year announced. The city of Fall River made an investment in that facility to the tune of about $2 million a couple decades ago. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts made an investment in that facility, helped build a wind turbine to power about 50% of the energy in that plant. So this is a company that has been a good partner in that community, has gotten investment dollars from Fall River, where, as you know, it is a working class community. Average household income there is about $34,000 a year.
Not the most affluent area in Massachusetts.
No, it is not. And so these are good, high quality jobs for 160 people out of this plant. Phillips, as I said, $340 million in multinational profits, not just out of this plant, but across the world. $190 million in stock buybacks. Let all 160 employees know that they were going to get closed down that plant by the end of the year and ship the jobs to Mexico. So when people say, how's the economy doing? For the CEO of Phillips Lighting, it's going great. For the shareholders of Phillips Lighting, it was a banner year. For the 160 employees that helped contribute
life is not so good
to the $340 million and that helped their share to increase their profits so much that they didn't do $190 million of stock buyback, their outlook is not so good. Their assistance essentially is coming from about 100 of those employees, the union that they belong to, and then federal taxpayer dollars through trade adjustment assistance, taxpayer dollars, not a buyout from the company. And state tax dollars from a rapid response team, not buyout from the company. So I think it's fair to point out that, I am not against people doing well, and I'm not against companies doing well. What I do take issue with is companies doing well at the expense of their employees, and those that end up, rather than saying, hey, even if you had to say there's some efficiencies that could be gained, we're going to have to make this transition to another place. I might be able to stomach that, but understand that you've got folks that are part of your community, employees that have been part of your team for literally decades, that you're not going to leave them high and dry. You're part of this community, Al, as much as anybody. You have heard a plethora of stories about local business owners that do everything they can to take care of their employees, that go to the ends of the earth to make sure that they put their employees first. Well, why can't we do that at a national level? Why?
You see, I hear CEOs and corporate staff are making too much money. Mm-hmm. My problem is not that they're making too much. Mm-hmm. It's the way they're making it. Mm-hmm. You know, Lee Iacocca made a fortune. He took no salary and said, I'm going to take it all in stock. Mm-hmm. If I restructure this company and do well by my stockholders, my employees, I'll do really well. Mm-hmm. I have no issue with that. What kills me is, the stories you hear about companies are losing money, they're going down, they're laying off people, and yet corporate staff's making a fortune.
Yeah. So look, again, when you are in a system where I want to succeed, I want our country to succeed, I want our companies to succeed, I want employers to succeed, I want employees to succeed. And it's hard to have employees succeed and get raises and better jobs if employers aren't doing well, right? So I believe in that system. That system also has to be shared equitably, right? There has to be I think would do well to look at some of the structural reforms that are necessary to ensure that the employees, those that are in fact powering the success that some of these corporations are having around the world, can share in that benefit, because I guarantee you one thing, they will share in the risk of loss. And they shouldn't be bearing the risk of loss and then the risk of the benefit that they've accumulated when they've done so well that their jobs then become dispensable.
I could go on forever, but Emily in your office would hurt me if I go over my time with you.
I appreciate the opportunity, my friend, always.
Thank you for coming on, and
Grateful.
Thank you for going across the aisle and maybe looking at what needs to be done versus who needs to get it done.
No, appreciate
and
it.
as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, thank you. May God bless, and may tomorrow be a better night than tonight.
Not too long since I've been home.